about how the Romans survived for another 22 years after Constantinople fell, which is crazy to me. I honestly had no idea that they held out for that long. The final bastion of ancient Rome was the Principality of Theodoro on Crimea, which lasted till 1475. With the conquest of Mangup by Ottoman forces, the principality was taking with it the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, after 2,128 years of existence of Roman civilization. The Principality of Theodoro was a state that existed in the northern coast of Crimea from 1263 to 1475 AD. The name derives from Theodore I Lascaris, who was an imperial governor of the adjacent theme of Samaria. When the Latin Empire seized Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, the locals were devastated. A lot of people fled to nearby areas like Scythia, and others returned back to the Eastern Roman Empire. And those that stayed behind continued to fight against the Crusaders until 1214, when they finally surrendered the city of Solon to the Crusaders. Following their defeat, the local population looked for aid to Theodore I Lascaris, the imperial governor of the nearby theme of Samaria. He offered asylum to the locals and became their prince, adopting the title Prince of Theodoro in 1263. In reality, the principality was a continuation of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine emperor recognized the de facto independence of the principality, but at the same time considered himself its suzerain. Because of this, the ruler of the principality was called the prince rather than king or duke. And coins minted in the territory also continued to display the imperial double-headed eagle. In fact, the principality also served as a safe haven for scholars and saved many ancient Greek texts from being lost forever. While other parts of the Byzantine Empire were getting sacked and destroyed by Western Crusaders, the principality remained untouched because it was far away from the empire's center, and because the Western Crusaders didn't want to risk the wrath of the Genoese. The Genoese had naval supremacy in the Black Sea and fiercely protected the principality since it was vital to their trade interests. Even though the principality was technically dependent on the Byzantine Empire, it maintained close relations with many powers of the region. For example, it traded with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and even minted coins in gold, silver and bronze with the imprint of both the Theotokian ruler and the Mamluk Sultan. It also maintained friendly relations with the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which sent an embassy to the principality in 1395. For several decades, the principality enjoyed peace, prosperity and cultural flourishing. However, its fate changed drastically when Baybars I, the founder of the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, died in 1341. After his death, civil war broke out between the Mamluk emirs. The infighting weakened the once great power, allowing the Ottomans to take advantage and conquer most of the Levant. In 1354, the Ottomans began threatening the security of the principality. Then 8 years later, the Mongol Golden Horde invaded the Crimean Peninsula. The Ottomans formed an alliance with the Crimeans, and together they waged war against the principality. The Ottomans took control of the important port of Kaffa in 1453, only 2 months before the fall of Constantinople. And the following year, the Golden Horde laid siege to the capital of the principality. Now, as we all know, 1453 was a pretty bad year for the Romans. You had the Ottomans conquering Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire, and putting an end to over 1,000 years of Eastern Roman rule in their ancestral home. And while events in Constantinople overshadowed everything else that happened in 1453, the fall of Kaffa was actually a much greater disaster for the Romans. And the reason why this is so significant is because this is what caused the surviving Romans to flee to Crimea and eventually led to the end of Roman rule there in 1475. As the Golden Horde approached, the citizens of the capital of the principality fled to the Genoese fortress of Soldaia. The Genoese repelled multiple assaults and offered their protection to those fleeing the city, including the Roman prince. However, after a few weeks, supplies began to dwindle and they were forced to abandon the fortress and flee across the sea to Caphe. There they hoped to find refuge in the castle built by the Teutonic Order. But unfortunately, when they arrived, the castle was already occupied by the Turks. Many of the Romans who hadn't been able to board the ships were captured by the Ottomans and sold into slavery. The surviving Romans were now forced to flee again, this time to Chersonesus, but the Ottoman fleet arrived too quickly and most of them were taken prisoner. Those who did manage to escape were welcomed by the governor of Chersonesus, Jakush Mogilevich, who granted them citizenship of the city. After the fall of Kaffa and the recapture of the city by the Turks, the Ottomans turned their attention to the remaining Roman strongholds on the peninsula. In 1456, the Ottoman Sultan sent an army to conquer Mangup, the seat of the Roman prince. The commander of the Ottoman forces was Orhan's Pasha, the same commander who had captured Belgrade from the Hungarians earlier that year. Orhan Pasha easily defeated the Roman field army and then besieged the city of Mangup. Once again, the citizens of Mangup fled to the Genoese fortress of Soldaia, hoping that the Genoese would save them, but the Genoese refused to help them, forcing the Romans to abandon the city and flee once more. The Ottoman victory at Mangup ended any hope of a Roman restoration in the area and marked the definite end of the Romans in Crimea. Most of the surviving Romans either settled in Chersonesus or fled further west, while the Ottomans took possession of the fortress of Soldaya, thus conquering the entire Crimean peninsula. And with that, the last remnants of the Roman Empire after 2,228 years of existence of Roman civilization came to an end. We typically think of ancient Rome as a sprawling empire that dominated much of the known world during the classical period generally considered to be between Greece's golden age in the 5th century BC and the Renaissance in the 14th century AD. But when we talk about the classical age of Rome, we're usually referring only to its last few centuries before it was eclipsed by the rising power of Christianity and then eventually fell to outside invaders. What most people don't realize is that Roman civilization, including the Roman Empire, actually lasted almost twice as long as this. And there's a lot more to its story than most people realize. So let's go back further than the traditional founding date of Rome in 753 BC and find out just how long the Romans were really around. To see how long Rome really lasted, we have to start at the beginning with its origins as a monarchy. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, who killed his twin brother Remus after the two of them founded the city together. However, the historicity of these legends are highly debated, and archaeological evidence has not confirmed any details of this account. While there may have been some truth to the legends, it's generally believed that Rome was founded as a small village on the banks of the Tiber River during the archaic period of ancient Greece. In 616 BC, the Etruscans established a monarchy in the region, but little is known about the early history of Rome until the expulsion of the last Etruscan king, Tarquinius Superbus, in 509 BC, which traditionally marks the end of the Roman monarchy and the beginning of the Roman Republic. However, despite the fact that the Romans overthrew their monarchy and established a republic ruled by elected officials in 509 BC, they still had kings. Each of the 5 original Roman patrician families claimed descent from one of the 3 legendary brothers who fled to Italy from Troy after the Trojan War, and they used their influence to secure positions of power for themselves. In addition, the Romans continued to practice many Etruscan traditions, such as having kings to lead their armies into battle. Instead, the Roman Republic was a mixed monarchy, or a government that combined elements of both monarchy and democracy. The Roman Republic lasted for 185 years until Julius Caesar seized power and became dictator in 44 BC. Although he was assassinated just 2 years later, his adopted son Octavian defeated his assassins and went on to become the first Roman emperor, taking the title Augustus in 27 BC. The Roman Empire, however, didn't even begin to look like itself yet. Its borders were much smaller than they would become during the height of the empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and Rome wasn't even its capital. In fact, the original capital was still in the central Italian city where the Roman Republic had been founded. This would remain the capital until Augustus moved it to the newly built city of Roma Nova on the Tiber River in 15 BC, which would eventually become the iconic city of Rome. It would take another 2 centuries for the Roman Empire to expand to include the entirety of the Mediterranean and North Africa and push all the way into Western Asia. Despite the fact that the Roman Empire had become the dominant power in the Mediterranean, though, it was still technically a republic. The emperor was merely the first citizen or princeps of Rome, a position that was supposed to be held by the most accomplished member of the Senate, which theoretically made him no more powerful than any other senator. But in practice, the emperors held significantly more power than anyone else. Even so, it would take several more centuries for Rome to officially turn into an empire. Although Augustus had been the first Roman emperor, his successors would come to rule Rome as absolute monarchs. But the title of emperor wouldn't become hereditary, and the imperial succession wouldn't follow clear rules until the Flavian dynasty came to power following the civil wars of the 60s and 70s AD. After Nero's suicide in 68 AD, Vespasian seized power and established the new dynasty. Vespasian and his heirs would rule Rome for 2 centuries, from 69 to 193 AD, and saw the empire reach its territorial peak. But once again, Rome's golden age as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean would not last forever. In 235 AD, the emperor's Praetorian Guard sold their support to the highest bidder and assassinated the unpopular emperor Maximinus Thrax, plunging Rome into crisis. 3 emperors were assassinated within 4 years, and the empire suffered numerous economic hardships and military defeats. By 284 AD, Rome was at risk of collapsing into chaos and civil war. In response to this dire situation, the Emperor Diocletian reorganized the empire in an attempt to save it. He divided it into halves, creating a tetrarchy, or rule by 4. Then he appointed a junior emperor to rule each half and designated one of his close relatives to be his heir. Unfortunately for Diocletian, his tetrarchy didn't last very long. After retiring in 305 BC, his designated heir took control of both halves of the empire, and his successors would go on to reunite the Roman Empire under their rule. After years of struggle, Constantine the South emerged victorious from a civil war against his brothers and rivals and established himself as the sole ruler of the entire Roman Empire in 324 AD. Shortly thereafter, he dedicated the city of Byzantium as the new capital of the empire, renaming it Constantinople in his own honor. Although Constantinople was far away from the heartland of Roman civilization, it was closer to the eastern Roman territories, and its location on the Bosporus Strait made it strategically valuable as a naval base. Constantine also helped to turn Christianity, which had been a persecuted religion under the Roman Empire, into the official state religion of Rome in 313 AD, with the Edict of Milan ending the era of official Roman hostility toward Christians. However, while the old Roman religion had been polytheistic and allowed for the worship of multiple deities, the new official religion of the empire was strictly monotheistic and demanded exclusive devotion to God. This caused friction between the Christian Roman emperors and the remaining pagan population of the empire. Despite this tension, though, Constantine's successors would continue to pursue policies favoring Christians. In 380 AD, Theodosius I made Christianity the sole official religion of the Roman Empire and closed down all pagan temples in the empire, confiscating their property and distributing it to churches. This marked a dramatic turning point for Christianity, making it the first great world religion to be embraced by a major world power. Unfortunately for the Roman Empire, though, the effects of this and other changes to Roman culture and society proved to be devastating. Under the later Roman emperors, the empire experienced an unprecedented decline in population. The Roman army, which had once been the backbone of Rome's military power, struggled to maintain discipline and was increasingly reliant on foreign mercenaries instead of Roman citizens. As Rome grew weaker, outside groups began to make incursions deeper and deeper into the provinces, weakening the empire even more. By the mid-5th century, the picture was grim. Rome had already lost control of its former North African provinces to the Vandals, and now faced the threat of invasion from Germanic peoples to the north and east. On August 24, 410, a Gothic army sacked Rome, looting the city and killing thousands. Only 150 years later, in 553, the Ostrogoths under the rule of Theodoric the Great conquered Italy and deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. But although the Western Roman Empire officially fell in 476-977, the Eastern Roman Empire continued to survive for another 1,000 years. Known by its detractors as the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire would endure the loss of the western half of the empire and continue expanding its territory in the Near East. Although historians often treat the Eastern Roman and Western Roman empires separately, the two empires remained legally and territorially connected throughout their existence, and the Eastern Roman emperors continued to style themselves as the rulers of all Rome. As late as the 10th century AD, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire included modern Turkey, Greece, the Balkans, and parts of the Middle East. But by this time, the empire was increasingly cut off from the rest of Europe, and its influence in the Mediterranean was waning. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople, severely weakening the Byzantines. Soon after, the Latin Empire of Constantinople fought against the restored Byzantine Empire for control of the city. But as the Byzantines struggled to hold on to their territory, a new power rose in the east, the Ottoman Turks. By 1453, the Ottomans had pushed the Byzantines back to the city of Constantinople. On May, Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottomans began bombarding the city with cannons. By the next month, the Byzantine forces defending the city had fallen, and Constantinople had been conquered, bringing an end to the Roman Empire, and that's why, although ancient Rome was founded as a monarchy in 753 BC, it would take over 2,200 years for it to fall. So how long do you think the Roman Empire lasted? Let me know in the comments below. Rome wasn't built in a day, but when it was huge. The city had around 1 million people living in it, making it easily the most densely populated place in all of Europe. And this is pretty shocking given that it wouldn't be until over 1,500 years later that another European capital would hit the 1 million mark. So how big was ancient Rome, and why does this matter? Let's start by answering the question of how we know Rome had a population of 1 million. It's actually fairly simple. When the Roman Emperor Nero decided to burn the city to the ground in 64 AD, approximately 1 million people were living there. We know this because the census data was recorded at the time and still exists. If you want more details, there are a couple good articles linked below, but basically we know these numbers because the Romans were meticulous record keepers. In fact, let me give you a quick tour of how the Romans collected population data. This is Rome with modern-day city limits shown in red. Back in the days of the Roman Empire, Rome didn't have city limits. Instead, the city was divided up into 14 regions, and each region was further divided into voting districts called centuries. Each century had a local magistrate who kept track of the people who lived there. During an imperial census, the local magistrates would go house to house, counting the number of people in each household and recording other data such as their wealth. This data was then sent up to the central government where it was compiled. For example, we know that Subura, one of the 14 regions of Rome, had 209,706 people in it during the census of 14 AD, and we know that Region 8 had 170,000 inhabitants. Okay, so what if we add all the regions up? You might think that 1 plus 1 equals 2, so 14 regions plus 0 equals 14 regions, but sadly it's not quite that simple. One region of Rome is missing from the census records. It's likely destroyed by fire, which is a little bit problematic. But don't worry, the clever statisticians at the British Academy were able to estimate the missing data. The population of the missing region is estimated to be about 40,000 people. So let's take a look at some of the calculations they used. If we ignore the estimates for the missing region and round 1,485 down to 1 million, we end up with the often quoted figure of 1 million. But keep in mind that technically the population could have been anywhere from 990,000 to 1,385,000. All things considered, coming up with a population count for ancient cities is difficult, but historians agree that it would be pretty hard to argue that Rome did not have a population of around 1 million in 64 AD. And here is a chart showing the estimated populations for several other cities during the same period. As you can see, Rome was the undisputed king. Even the largest city in the largest country at the time, India, only had about 50,000 people living in it. And all of the other cities combined don't even hit 1 million. There simply was no other city that came close to the size of Rome. Now, back in the days of the Roman Empire, the world population was somewhere between 200 and 300 million people. This means that around 0.3 to 0.5% of the entire world's population lived in Rome. And this is pretty insane. Imagine if we did this today. Today Tokyo has a metro population of around 37 million people. That's around 0.5% of the global population. So Tokyo has about 10 times the population density of ancient Rome. But let's be honest, there's more space in Tokyo because it's smaller. The real question is, how does Rome compare to other cities that have a similar area? Here is a map of Italy showing the area of Greater Rome. To understand how dense this really is, let's zoom out a bit so we can see where Italy is located. And then let's switch over to Google Maps and use the ruler tool to get an idea of the area of Greater Rome. Since we're going to be comparing Rome to modern day cities, I figured we should also include the Vatican. So the total area is 1,291 square kilometers, or about 498 square miles. So let's see how Rome compares to some other major cities. Cairo covers a slightly larger area at 1,300 square kilometers. Mexico City is almost twice as large at 2,000 square kilometers. But let's jump over to Europe and check out Paris. Paris covers an area of 105 square kilometers. That's 12 times smaller than Rome. Now let's take a look at London. London comes in at 1,572 square kilometers. Not too bad. London is only 1.2 times larger than Rome. The problem with comparing Rome to either Cairo, Mexico City, or London is that none of them had nearly as many people living in them as Rome did back in the day. According to the UN, Cairo has a metro population of about 10 million people, Mexico City has about 22 million, and London has 14.4 million. Now, since it's kind of difficult to calculate the exact metro population for ancient Rome, let's look at what historians have estimated for the population within the city walls. In 2021, the population of central London is estimated to be around 9 million people. So we can compare apples to apples by looking at the population of central London. In 64 AD, there were about 1 million people living in the center of Rome, which means that central Rome was about 10 times as densely populated as central London. Today there are around 29 million people living in the entire metro area of New York City. This means that at its peak, Rome was about as densely populated as the 10 largest US cities combined. In terms of pure population density, Rome ranks 6th. Here's a table showing the top 5 most densely populated places on Earth, both past and present. Cairo comes in at number 5 with a population density of 5,600 people per square kilometer. And right behind it is ancient Rome with a density of 5,400 people per square kilometer. As I mentioned earlier, it wouldn't be until the early 1800s that another European capital reached 1 million in population. And this happened to be London. There were a few reasons for this. For one, London was never completely destroyed and lost a bunch of people. Secondly, London was never the seat of a massive empire. Rome was the capital of the Roman Empire, so people from all over the empire would travel there for business and leisure. Plus, it was home to some of the most important buildings in the empire, like the Colosseum. In fact, 50,000 people are estimated to have attended gladiator fights at the Colosseum every single day. At the height of the Roman Empire, about 1/3 of the Senate would show up to Rome each year to do their civic duty, and this was true for the first several hundred years of the empire. After that, the emperors started to abolish the voting rights of the Senate and moved them to a system where the emperors appointed people to represent the people, so fewer and fewer senators showed up to Rome. Of course, once the Roman Empire fell, Rome stopped being the center of the universe and the population declined. I'm going to put a link to a fantastic video by Invicta about the fall of Rome in the description below. But one thing that helped contribute to the decline of Rome was climate change. Climate models suggest that the average summer temperature in Rome rose by about 3 degrees Celsius, or about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. At the same time, there was a shift in wind patterns, which led to fewer and fewer Mediterranean civilizations developing along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This was caused by a combination of volcanic activity and a weakening of the North Atlantic monsoon system. You might have heard that Rome was built on 7 hills, but during the time of the Roman Empire, much of the land surrounding the 7 hills was reclaimed by building roads over swamps and low-lying areas. This made travel easier, but it also made the city much more vulnerable to flooding. This is a painting depicting the Great Flood of 593, but this wasn't an isolated incident. Flooding regularly devastated the city, which killed people and destroyed property. Ancient Rome is one of the most famous cities in history. It's the capital of Italy today and is also home to the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and other incredible pieces of architecture. It was the center of the Roman Empire for many years and was home to over 1 million people at its peak. But did you know that none of the houses had kitchens? Most Romans were fine with this arrangement because the kitchen was more of a community affair back then. They would socialize while cooking in communal kitchens and also eat together there as well. There was no need to cook at home when the taverns and street vendors could do it for you. So most apartments and houses didn't even have a kitchen. Now that's pretty crazy, right? Why wouldn't every house have a kitchen? Well, there are several reasons why this happened. The first reason was that the kitchen wasn't important to Roman culture. Back in those days, food was considered a way to bring people together, and it was often shared among family members and neighbors. This meant that having a kitchen in your own home wasn't really necessary since you could just go next door and use theirs. In addition, most street vendors sold prepared foods, so if you didn't feel like cooking, you could just pick up something from a street vendor on your way home. Finally, the size of the houses in ancient Rome played a role in the lack of kitchens. Since most people lived in small apartments, there simply wasn't enough room to include a kitchen. Additionally, kitchens required a lot of ventilation, which could be difficult to achieve in a cramped apartment building. Because of these factors, it was common for families to share a kitchen with their neighbors or to buy their food from street vendors instead of cooking at home. While this may seem strange to us today, it was a practical solution to the challenges of cooking and eating in ancient Rome. And hey, maybe we can all learn a thing or two about community and convenience from our Roman ancestors. Who knows? Maybe they were onto something by not stressing about having a kitchen in every home. Instead, maybe we could focus on creating more communal spaces where people can come together to cook and eat. Just imagine the possibilities. A kitchen where neighbors can get together to share recipes and stories over a pot of spaghetti. A community kitchen where families can gather to prepare traditional dishes for special occasions. The idea is pretty exciting, don't you think? Of course, there are some challenges to overcome, like finding space for communal kitchens in our increasingly urban world and ensuring that everyone has access to them, regardless of their background or beliefs. But the potential benefits to our social cohesion, well, they could be huge. After all, sharing a meal is one of the most fundamental ways that humans connect with each other. So who knows, maybe the ancient Romans were onto something by not stressing about having a kitchen in every home. The design of ancient Roman houses played a significant role in the absence of kitchens. The typical Roman house was designed around a central courtyard called the atrium. This atrium served as the focal point of the home, providing natural light and ventilation to the rooms that surrounded it. The atrium was also used for a variety of purposes, including dining, receiving guests, and even bathing. In fact, the atrium was so important to Roman domestic life that many houses were built around it, even if it meant sacrificing the inclusion of a kitchen. That's because the kitchen was seen as a secondary space that was not essential to the function of the home. The rooms that surrounded the atrium were designed for specific purposes. For example, the tablinum was used for dining and receiving guests. The cubiculum was used for sleeping, and the triclinium was used for dining. These rooms were carefully designed to maximize functionality and efficiency. For example, the cubiculum was often located near the atrium so that residents could take advantage of the natural light and ventilation while they slept. But this type of layout meant that there was no dedicated space for a kitchen. This is not to say that cooking did not take place in Roman homes, however. In fact, cooking was an essential part of domestic life in ancient Rome. However, cooking was typically done in a separate structure outside of the main house. This separate structure was known as a culina or kitchen in English. The culina was a small building that contained a hearth and was used for cooking food. It was usually located near the main house, but it was separated from it by a courtyard or garden. The culina was typically staffed by a cook and one or more servants who would prepare meals for the family. In some cases, the culina was attached to the main house, but in many cases it was a freestanding building. This separation allowed the cook and servants to work without disturbing the rest of the household. In addition, it kept the smell and smoke from cooking contained to the culina and away from the rest of the house. Even though the kitchen was not part of the main house, it was still an important part of domestic life in ancient Rome. Meals were an important part of Roman culture, and they were often eaten together as a family. The kitchen was the heart of this activity since it was where the food was prepared. It's important to note that the kitchen in ancient Rome was not like the modern kitchen. In fact, it was much more rudimentary. The cook would use simple tools and techniques to prepare meals. There was no refrigeration, so food had to be cooked fresh. In addition, there were no appliances such as an oven or stove. Instead, the cook would use a hearth to cook food. This made cooking a time-consuming process, but it was also a communal activity that brought the family together. Overall, the design of ancient Roman houses played a significant role in the absence of kitchens. While cooking was an important part of domestic life, it was typically done in a separate structure outside of the main house. This allowed the cook and servants to work without disturbing the rest of the household, and it kept the smell and smoke from cooking contained. So while it might seem strange to us today, the ancient Romans had a practical and efficient way of dealing with their culinary needs. Now let's talk about what life was like in a Roman house without a kitchen. As we mentioned earlier, most Roman houses were designed around a central courtyard, which served as the focal point of the home and provided natural light and ventilation. Instead of a kitchen, the courtyard often featured a fountain or a small garden. Residents would eat their meals in the courtyard or in a room that opened onto it. This would have been especially pleasant during the mild Mediterranean winters. However, things could get a little bit messy without a dedicated kitchen area. Cooking often took place outside in the street or in a communal kitchen shared by several families. This meant that residents had to carry their food and cooking supplies outside, which could be cumbersome. Additionally, the smoke and smells from cooking could permeate throughout the house, which could be unpleasant. And then there were the pests. Without a kitchen to keep bugs and animals out, Roman residents had to deal with unwanted guests looking for a tasty snack. To make matters worse, garbage disposal was a challenge. Without modern plumbing, waste had to be carried out of the house and disposed of in public garbage dumps, which could be smelly and unsanitary. Despite these challenges, the Romans adapted to their circumstances. Many families developed routines and systems for preparing and eating meals. For example, some families might have had a designated space in their home where they would store their food and cooking supplies. Others might have had a set schedule for when they would go out to buy food or cook. Over time, these practices became ingrained in Roman culture, and people simply learned to live with the challenges of not having a kitchen in their homes. Ultimately, the absence of kitchens in ancient Roman houses was a testament to the ingenuity and adaptability of the Roman people. They were able to make the best of their circumstances and develop systems and routines that allowed them to live comfortably without a modern kitchen. Have you ever heard the phrase, "when Caligula was emperor"? We're all familiar with the song by Queen and David Bowie, but most people don't know about the story behind it. They probably wouldn't have written a song about it if it weren't true. The year is 12 AD. The place is the city of Puteoli, located near modern Naples. A young man named Gaius Caesar, or Caligula, is visiting the Oracle of Delphi, who delivers her prophecies through a trance-like state and speaking in verse. But this is not your typical visit. When Caligula asks the oracle what the future holds for him, her reply is that he has no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae, a notoriously rough stretch of water between the Bay of Naples and the city of Misenum. In fact, even when the winds are calm, horses cannot gallop across its waves. But let's be honest, when someone tells you something is impossible, what do? You do it. You take their prophecy and shove it so far down your throat that they can taste breakfast. And that's exactly what Caligula did. Upon returning to Rome, he wasted no time in starting work on one of the largest engineering projects in history. It would change the course of Rome forever. The idea of building a bridge over the Bay of Baiae was not a new one. In fact, Julius Caesar himself had considered it when he was alive. The Romans had been constructing bridges since the 6th century BC, and by the time of Augustus there were several small bridges scattered throughout the empire. But none of them compared to the sheer size and scope of Caligula's vision. He wanted a bridge that would allow his army to move quickly and efficiently between the two cities, which would help defend against any potential invaders. Plus, it would also look really cool and give him some bragging rights. Not to mention it would make the trip from Rome to Misenum much easier and faster. Caligula commissioned the construction of the largest pontoon bridge in history. The project took 5 years to complete and required the labor of thousands of soldiers and civilians. But finally, in 33 AD, it was finished. The bridge was 3,700 feet long and 40 feet wide, made up of 20 floating platforms connected together by planks of wood. Each platform was equipped with 2 masts that helped stabilize the bridge and keep it from tipping over. This would prove to be crucial in the stormy waters of the Bay of Baiae. To protect the bridge from damage, Caligula also built 2 rows of small boats and anchored them along the sides. These boats were filled with water and weighted down with stones, making them almost impossible to move. This would prevent anyone from ramming into the bridge or trying to sabotage it. Plus, the weight of the water would also help stabilize the entire structure. Now that the bridge was completed, it was time for Caligula to put it to the test. On the morning of July 23rd, 33 AD, Caligula saddled up his horse and rode out onto the bridge. A crowd of onlookers gathered to watch as the emperor made his way across the treacherous waters. As the horse started to enter the bay, the crowds began to panic. The waves were crashing around them and it looked like the horse would be swept away at any second. But Caligula stayed calm, keeping his eyes fixed on the other side of the bay. His horse must have been pretty calm too, because otherwise it would have bolted. But then, something unexpected happened. The horse started to pick up speed. At first it was just a little faster than a normal walking pace, but soon it was a full-blown gallop. The crowd gasped as the horse and rider raced across the bridge. They made it all the way from one side of the bay to the other without falling into the water. It only took them 6 minutes. It was one of the most spectacular sights that anyone in the crowd had ever seen. As Caligula reached the other side of the bridge, he raised his arms in the air in victory. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the emperor had proven that the Oracle of Delphi was wrong. He had successfully ridden a horse across the Bay of Baiae, and he had done it in record time too. News of Caligula's victory spread like wildfire throughout the Roman Empire. People came from all over to see the bridge and the horse that had helped Caligula become famous. Of course, the Oracle wasn't too happy about being proven wrong. She tried to retract her statement, saying that she never actually said anything about Caligula not being able to ride a horse across the bay, but everyone knew that she was just embarrassed and trying to save face. Caligula didn't let it go, though. He erected a statue of himself on the bridge to commemorate his victory and make sure everyone knew who was responsible for the amazing feat. For a while, things were good. The bridge was a success, and Caligula was riding high on his victory. But as time went on, problems started to arise. The bridge wasn't as stable as everyone had hoped, and there were several instances where it almost collapsed. In addition, it was difficult to repair the bridge when it was damaged by storms or shipwrecks, and let's be honest, the Bay of Baiae was notorious for its bad weather. Storms would often come in unannounced and wreak havoc on the bridge, leaving it in need of repairs. These problems eventually led to the downfall of the bridge. In 41 AD, just 8 years after it was built, a storm came in and destroyed the structure. The bridge was never rebuilt, and the statue of Caligula was lost forever. Despite its short lifespan, though, the bridge had made a lasting impact on Roman history. It had proven that the Romans were capable of building structures on the same level as the Greeks and the Egyptians. Plus, it had given Caligula bragging rights that he had successfully completed a project that had been deemed impossible. Sadly, Caligula didn't live long enough to enjoy his victory. He was assassinated in 41 AD while visiting the city of Antium, but his legacy lived on. The story of how he built a bridge over the Bay of Baiae and rode a horse across it was passed down through the ages. It became a popular story among the Romans, and even the Greeks and Egyptians heard tales of the great Roman emperor. If you've ever heard the song "Another Brick in the Wall" by Pink Floyd, then you know that the Romans aren't the only ones who have created a bridge over troubled water. The band used the story of Caligula and the bridge over the Bay of Baiae as inspiration for their hit song, which is about breaking free from societal constraints. Like Caligula, the singer in the song doesn't want to be told what they can and can't do. They want to be free to express themselves and explore the world without limitations. The bridge represents the barriers that society tries to put up to keep people in their place, but the singer is determined to break through and make their own path. Just like Caligula built a bridge over the Bay of Baiae, the singer in the song is building their own bridge over the troubled waters of life. They're creating their own path and breaking free from the expectations of others. The song is a call for freedom of expression and a reminder that we should never let anyone tell us what we can and can't do. You can find the full lyrics of Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd on our website. So remember the next time you hear this classic song to think of Caligula and his incredible bridge over the Bay of Baiae. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more entertaining historical stories.